And we're back with another episode of On the Record with Tiffany and Kevin.
And Kevin, she doesn't like that. She says it a little disdain.
Hey, we got some chemistry. We got chemistry. That's what they tell us. Here on 9:30 a.m. The Answer. And we can also be seen on the African American Network television, where we have a local feel with a global reach.
And also we can be found on YouTube, right?
Yes, and wherever podcasts stream. We just want to say a quick thank you to one of our favorite sponsors, because the SmackDown is still going between Kevin and me. I've already started my eating well.
Okay. Right.
Yes. And HEB, thank you so much. We had the best meeting ever with HEB last week, and you guys have some good food over there. The Siete company, we had your tortillas last night, and they're the bomb. Everybody needs to try this.
Yes,
it's great.
All right.
Well, today we have civil rights activist, historian, an all around great guy. But he's willing to. He's gonna bring the fire. He's gonna bring the fire.
Marcel Salas.
Oh well.
Now we were talking about this before we started recording, right? So Tiffany, we were talking about, hey, who should we do? Blah blah blah, and then she brought up your name, and I was like,
this guy is
that
amazing.
Commissioner Calvert had the book on, and she said, yeah. I said, that's like the academic Uncle Abe, right? So that's Tiffany's uncle.
My favorite
He's
uncle, by the
hardcore,
way.
right? And I went, oh my God. But I read his book, right? He wrote a very provocative book, right? The Alamo, A Cradle of Lies, Slavery, and white supremacy. I was like, oh, yeah. And I read through the book. It's a well-documented book. It's
well-written.
It's well-written. And it basically, I would summarize it as, challenging the myth that we often carry of history versus the reality of history, right? And so, and I'm a nerd, by the way, so one of the first things I do is I take a book and I go right to the bibliography, right? The bibliography and the notes. And so, and that's where I start at, and I reverse engineer into the book. And Tiffany's been, she said, you're just strange. Who does that? Well, I don't know.
We read differently. Yeah. We have two completely different reading styles.
Yeah, I start at the end. Tell me, I want to see the ending, then I can go back and read the book.
And I like to read from the beginning, and then I go back and highlight sections and pull out what I want to, what really stood out to me, and then I read it again, and I read like 3 times before.
Yeah.
As long as you're a thorough reader, the methodology doesn't matter.
Exactly. Thank you, Professor.
However, I do the same thing he does, because I want to see the documentation.
I don't want to waste my time.
Yeah, I want to see the documentation.
And that's what he says. He's like,
don't read that book.
Some people are lightweights.
Yeah, but either way works, because if you're a good reader and you have some background knowledge, you can pretty much pull from your own experiences about what you're reading, and then you just have it verified when you get to the end.
All right, and we're not going to start with the book. I want to start with knowing his history as a kid. Yeah. Always people in their 70s, they're like the last generation of people who experienced segregation. Right, and so who actually experienced the emotional pull of it and the environmental and cultural effects of it, right? So we want to start there.
And the interest is, wow, you went through all of that. Not microaggressions like today. Microaggressions, that's not the same.
So let's start there. You were born in 49.
Correct.
Right, here in our lovely city of San Antonio.
Well, everything you see around here is built on racism. But go ahead.
Okay, Uncle Abe's coming at us, right? All right. So walk us through, like your earliest memory of your family.
Well, I was raised on the east side of San Antonio. I went to Catholic school for starters, and then wound up at Phyllis Wheatley High School, which was segregated black house school, because it was like maybe 100 yards from my house. And it didn't charge tuition. Catholic schools, you had to pay tuition. Yeah. And my mother and father were in the midst of a divorce, and so the money dried up. So it was best for me to go to public school, and I was just right down the street. So, yeah, I grew up in a black community. I grew up in a multiracial family of my father, Afro-Mexican, who who was Mexican one day and black the next. and
What does that mean?
yeah, what that means is he was very fluent in Spanish, but he also recognized his skin was much darker than mine, and that showed up on different occasions when we were told to go to the back of the bus, or when we had to go when we went to the theater, had to go to the back of the theater, not so much because of me, but because of him. So we would have to go to the back of the theater at the Majestic, which was on College Street, when we went to the theater. So I experienced that firsthand.
And what was that like? You know?
Well, I tell you, it's funny, though, because it depends on who was at the ticket booth on that particular day. Because they would do a visual vetting, what I call visual. I call it a racist stare, visual vetting. They're going to look at you, and you can always tell. That's how I tell a racist. People of mixed ancestry normally do that. They look at you hard, or they try to cover it so it doesn't look so hard. But they start at the top. They're looking for curly hair or any kind of curls. They're looking for wide noses or thin lips. And skin color becomes paramount in some cases. But at the ticket booth, it depends on who was there at the Majestic Theater. One guy would look at my father and kind of do that and then look at me and go ahead. And so then the next guy that was at the ticket booth would say, no, y'all got to go around the back. So I saw that from two different directions. It's kind of like people don't understand this, but everybody talks about having to go sit in the back of the train, the back of the bus, if you were African American. But there were some cities in the South where they forced you to sit in the front of the bus and the train so the whites could watch you from behind, thinking that, stereotyping you, you're a criminal in this way, we can keep an eye on these criminals. So there are some southern cities that the Jim Crow law made blacks sit in the front of the bus. Nobody knows that. They don't talk about that, but that's absolutely true. So anyway,
and that would seem like it would go along with that mindset more.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, which is even more nefarious.
And so when I was coming up, there was not a single restaurant in downtown San Antonio where a black person could go eat. They were all segregated. You couldn't do that. And so depending on who the restaurant owner was, there again, my dad would be told no, but another restaurant would just, yeah, come on in.
So so that sticks with you, right? So I was thinking when you were telling that story, I was thinking about Tiffany's grandmother, Victoria Appleton. Everyone called her Ma. So I just want to explain. Or Vicky. I didn't call her Vicky. I called her Ma.
Yeah, everybody in the family called her Ma.
We called her Ma, and so that's one of the things that she talks about is that it just depends. Now Ma was actually lighter than you. If you looked at her, when we go to Miami, everyone would start speaking Spanish to her.
It would just drive her crazy.
It drive her crazy because she's
not Afro-Latina. Yeah. She's just black.
Yeah, she's American, as she would say. She got extremely racist, to be honest with you, right? But she tells that story of going, there was actually a barbecue place, we won't call the name, that she refused to eat at because she said they didn't serve black people because they wouldn't serve her husband.
And they were wondering why she was doing that.
Well, she refused to eat there because, not just because they didn't serve black people, but because they were black. They were just really fair-skinned black people who were passing, and they didn't serve their own people. And that, for her, was just like, I don't care how light your skin is. You don't go and pretend that you're not what you are.
All right. So
that was a big deal in our family.
All right. So that's the environment you're raised in, and one of the things that my grandmother always and I bring this up just as a historical reference. When she and we go to a lot of cemeteries when I go pick her up and we go driving, right? And she always talks about having to avert her eyes down or get off of the sidewalk to let the other person come through.
To let the white
person come through. And like in my mind,
that's
it's crazy, right?
That's not even something that I can conceptualize.
Yeah.
And that people that are younger than us have experienced. They don't know what that feels like.
Yeah.
Well, and part of that you might call Anglo culture, where the eye stare, look me in the eye kind of thing, is Anglo culture. And it's interesting that in some Native American tribes, they're taught not to look people in the eye. I asked a Comanche one day, a friend of mine, I said, what's the deal with not looking people in the eye? He said, well, it's a sign of respect. Don't look them in the eye. And then I said, well, when did Comanches in the past look people in the eye? He said, we only did that when we meant to kill you.
Yeah.
But it will take your spirit away. So that's a totally different
That's
understanding
an act of aggression, right?
of looking, of looking people in the eye. Nigerians are really good about looking people in the eye. Boy, they will hawk-eye you. Similar to Anglos, it's an eye thing. But not all Africans and Native Americans don't believe in that necessarily. Black folks like to look for people in the eye.
Oh yeah, that's a big thing.
And I think that came from West
respect.
Africa.
Yeah. And so, all right. So I try to be methodical in the question answering or asking, right? So history, your father, extremely dark man, right? You look like somebody from Louisiana. Right? That's what I thought when I first saw you.
Parlez-vous français?
Yeah, that's what I thought. Yeah, boy, yeah. Come on over here. So the impact of that, because I share with you that when I looked at the census, your father is marked as a white man.
Correct.
In the 1950 census,
Right.
which has just been released for all you genealogy geeks out there.
Right.
So
Right. Well, in South Texas and many other places, it was politically expedient to label Mexican Americans as white, because in certain places where there were white political bosses who controlled the political arena, they could increase the chances of them winning a mayoral election or city council race by having Mexican Americans vote for the candidate that they wanted. So if they could get the health department and the commissioner's court to identify a certain segment of the population as being white, then they could incorporate that group of people into a voting block and win an election. That idea actually caused county governments to separate from each other in the 1920s and 30s. I think Zapata County and another county down south was created because there were too many Mexicans labeled white, and they were winning the whites who wanted them to. And look, it wasn't Mexicans winning the elections; it was white men winning the elections with Mexican votes. So these other political bosses, white political bosses in these other counties, they said, you know what, we don't want to be a part of that county anymore. Let's split off and form another county. So you probably have 3 counties down in South Texas that split off for exactly those reasons.
And that is documented, right? So this is the other thing, right? So when I met Mario, I was reading through his book because I was like, it sounds like Uncle Abe, and so I was flipping.
What's his phone number, by the way?
You be hanging out with Uncle Abe.
I was just like, oh my God! But when I went back and I started in the bibliography, and as I'm looking through the bibliography, I'm like, oh, that's what that is, and so I'm able to go and verify those pieces of information. And for me,
it's all true.
That's true, and that's the wonderful part of history is where we break up the mythology part with the fact part of it there.
Yeah, and I believe you can find that in David Montejano's book. I think I have him in a reference.
Yeah, you have him there. Yeah. And you quoted some interesting people in your book, and I know I said we're going to wait on the book, but it's an interesting book. The title is very, very provocative. I was like, oh my God, it's a provocative title. Well, as you go through the book is well documented. One of the people that you quote, and I always forget her name, is a historian in. Here he is, a historian from UT. And her name, I always say Diana. Yeah, it's Diana Berry. Mm-hmm. Diana Berry, right? She wrote a great book, How Much is a Pound of Flesh? Yeah. And then that database which they have behind a paywall, by the way. There's a database, a good book in which they go through 36 archives, and they go from the period of like 1791 to like 1862, 63. Mm-hmm. And they go through and they pull out the values that slaves were selling for. And she has a rough estimation of how much a slave cost based on age, based on gender, based on beauty standards, right? And
sometimes based on weight.
Yes. Mm-hmm. So when I saw you quote her,
they sold kids by the pound.
Yep. Yeah. So a pound of flesh, and that's what it's based on.
And that, when you hear that and you're looking at that, that really drives home what slavery is.
Yep.
And it also drives home the fact that we haven't begun to touch true education about this.
And the reason
in the general public does not know what this truly looks like.
But for me, the reason that's important is I challenge the idea that we haven't made progress, because when you look at that time frame, post-slavery or even before slavery, the average American, or in our case, as slaves, non-American, they were all racist. Even slaves were racist. They held some view of race, right? That the lighter your skin was, the closer to white you were,
Yes, but that was
you were
also
more
drummed
favored.
into them.
Yeah, that was
Yes.
but the whole society was a racist society.
Yeah,
Openly
even the
roasted.
people that are being treated poorly have racist
So
views
for me, the
because
importance of that time period is to
of
use
the
that as the
system.
standard and say, we've made progress. We may not be at the ideal. We've made
definitely not at
progress.
the ideal.
We can be involved more, right? And then we can debate how far that goes. Right. And I'm okay with that, which is why I think your title is like smack, right? So anytime something offends me, I'm like, I got to go read that. I got to read that.
I did not find the title offensive.
Well, the title,
I found
the title worked in that case.
Oh, yeah, you got me, right?
See, I found the title to be, somebody's telling the truth. Let me see. Let me see.
Well,
Let me amplify this voice.
Tiffany and Kevin, I have to point this out too. What I always worried about is people making these false arguments, one of which is called presentism. I never look at the past through modern eyes. I look at the past through the documents that were written at that time.
Yep.
So this whole argument about presentism is fallacy. It's a joke. And you look at the primary, I don't have to make up anything from modern eyes when you read the Texas Articles of Succession or you read the Texas Constitution. They said it themselves. So I don't have to look at it with modern eyes.
Yeah. And
all you have to do is, like, literally, this is
just read it.
That's right. Yeah. This is a historian's account. And there's a very big difference between somebody who is reporting the historical facts and somebody that is interpreting.
Yeah, so
interpreting facts.
And there is the mythology of history, right? And then there's the actual history, right? So mythology of history is generally used in high school, right? So they want to, because there's this historical thought, if you will, that in order to hold a nation or a group together, and you and I were talking about this earlier, they got to have common themes, common belief systems that they hold, right? And so, but unfortunately, right, at what point, and this is the thing, at what point do you start introducing history, the reality of history in along the way? Right. So tell me how you feel about that, right? So like if I'm teaching my daughter, right, about history as we walk through that, how much of that should be the mythology of Washington never lied? He actually chopped down the cherry tree. We know that's, I remember telling my dad, he was like, you believe that? Yeah. I was like, well, okay.
Yeah. So, yeah, no, there's a lot to consider, and certainly we ought to, at some point in the future, be able to say that we're talking about history as it has evolved, as opposed to what was originally said. You know, you can't look at, I mentioned that in the book, you can't look at, if you're looking at an elephant with a microscope, then you might be missing what the whole elephant looks like. Mm-hmm. If you're looking at the whole elephant and not the surroundings, then you may miss the surroundings in which the elephant lives. If you look at a little piece of history, that's not research. You have to look at both the micro pieces and the macro pieces. Yep. So you got to zoom in and zoom out, and when you do that, you get a clearer picture of what can be. So when you teach history, you ought to teach the good, the bad, and the ugly, and I think that's the way it ought to be taught.
Yep.
Exactly.
Because if you're because you build strength. A nation can build strength when it's honest with its people. And you can see now that strength ain't there because people are finding out they were been lied to.
Yep.
So that's how I would look at that. What greater thing could one say in the future when one looks back and could possibly say, we used to be taught that Jefferson was a great man and never taught that he was owned slaves, but we worked our way beyond that and we worked our way through that. And we now live in a non-racial society. We live in an anti-racist society. We can't say that now. But if we begin to have people look at the primary source stuff, look at the true history of any nation, then I think you can move toward a stronger society. You're not going to get stronger by lying to people.
Yeah,
exactly.
I agree with that.
And you're not going to get people to trust you in very key areas like healthcare, like all of these. We have so many different places where marginalized communities don't trust what is considered the authorities or the majority. Correct. They don't trust your word because there have been lies in so many other areas.
Well, let me go to the flip side of that, right? Because I always this is one of the things that drives Tiffany crazy about me, is that I always want to argue the other side, because I want to see it from the other view as well, right? So I'm thinking of a friend of mine, a really good friend of mine, and we talk about the subject of history, right? And from a viewpoint of someone classified as a white male, right? He says, well, at what point am I going to be taken out of the history? Am I supposed to feel bad about these things that happened in history, right? So when I hear you, because I always bring up slavery and different things in our culture, right? When I say our culture, the American culture, and he always says, am I supposed to feel bad about that? I'm like, no, I don't want you to feel bad.
No, and that comes from his lack of knowledge about the whites who oppose slavery, about the whites who oppose race.
My radical Republicans.
Yeah,
right?
well, exactly. What happened to John Brown? The white heroes that were created in this society are not heroes in my mind at all. The ones who were really heroes, like John Brown and other people in Texas, Benjamin Lundy, who's an anti-slavery advocate, and hundreds of other
Ulysses
whites.
S. Grant was an anti.
Hundreds of other whites. Their stories not being told. So no, you don't have to feel bad about that.
You got a lot of stories that you can feel good about, but you haven't been told
you
those
just
stories.
Need to know the ones you can feel good
That's
about.
Right.
Yeah, and I think,
right.
and then I think,
and that's the beauty of telling the truth instead of this this antiquated idea.
But you have
of
to
what
come with that. Tiff and I, we have 2 minutes here. We're having a discussion like we would at the house. If we invited Marty over, this is the same discussion we'd have at the house, right? So I happen to be patriotic, like we all are here, and I believe in the mythology of exceptionalism, of American exceptionalism. Doesn't mean we intended to be that way from the beginning, but it just happened to be that we ended up that way, right? And that we're in this culture now that's held together, that wasn't always held together by the idea of freedom. It's probably after World War II we entered into the Cold War that people were like, hey, America, put up or shut up. You say you believe in freedom. How free are you when you have a whole group of people that aren't free, right? So that's my concern. Like when I hear people on television or on the radio, this leftist front, right? And I have to be careful of that because that's a very broad term, right? That's my concern, is that they remove this sense of pride that I have in this country, right? But I like your view of, because after I got past your title, started reading your book and talked to you, I'm like, wait a minute, this guy is not what came to my mind on this here. It's like, hey, I have this story that I believe that's parts truth, parts not, right? And then I have this documented reality as well.
And see where we are
different, right?
Is that I think that there has to be both. I think that I'm always leery of anybody on the far right, far left, because I don't think that people live in these two extremes. People live somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
And nobody's 100% right on either. Well, first of all, I don't think the far right is right at all. But nobody is 100% correct on where they on these extreme ideas. Everybody believes a little bit of this and a little bit of that. You got to figure out what is truth that's guiding your beliefs. What's the truth? Where's the truth at?
See, in my opinion, America was not exceptional in the very beginning.
No, it wasn't.
It was horrible.
I disagree with that.
It was horrible because white supremacy ruled everything. And you could easily make the argument we never had a democracy until at least 1965, 64, 65 with the Voting Rights Act, when they tried to eliminate the fact that you couldn't vote because you were black or you were a woman or whatever the case was. So was there any real democracy before that? And the answer, in my opinion, no, there wasn't. So we only had a real democracy after 1965, or at least the attempt to move toward a real democracy after 1965. Before that, I guess we could say we were exceptional at treating people bad. So
okay. So we're up on the time here.
Okay, we're going to do our next segment.
Yeah, we can do our next segment as we go through that. And so my counter argument would be that if you look at...
Wait,
I'll be quiet.
You've been listening to On the Record with Tiffany, and our special guest, Professor Marcel Salas. And we're going to come back and review his book, The Alamo, A Cradle of Lies, Slavery, and White Supremacy.